He is the Democratic congressman representing New York's 15th district, who at 25 years old became New York City's youngest elected official and the first Afro-Latino LGBTQ member of Congress. Please welcome Representative Ritchie Torres. Hey, how are you, sir?
Good to see you.
Great to see you. I recognize you. All right. Well, I'm very impressed with you, I must say, not just because of your impressive resume, but you do things that take a lot of guts because politicians are usually political. Like you say, your goal is to be the champion of the poor. Politicians never talk about the poor because they don't vote. It's always about, I'm working for the middle class. But you represent a rather poor district, right, economically.
The poorest congressional district in America.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And they vote, you got them out to vote.
Yep.
For you. Yeah. So what do you make of that, where politicians, is that just it, because they don't vote in the numbers that the middle class does?
Look, poor people have no lawyers or lobbyists, no PACs or super PACs.
Right.
You know, for me, it's deeply personal. You know, my life has been a journey from poverty in the Bronx to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. And I'm a product of public investments, like public schools and public housing and public transit and public hospitals. You know, I would not be where I am today were it not for those public investments and the opportunity and stability it gave me and my family. And so the central mission of my life is to fight for the poor, is to fight for the social safety net.
And how's Biden doing with that? How's Biden doing with that? I mean, I know he's passed a lot of things, the child tax credit. Does that not deposit money right in the bank account of everybody who has kids and makes, I think it's up to $150,000, which seems a little high.
Not in New York City.
150?
The rent is too damn high in New York City.
I should be giving money to people with kids who have 150 grand coming in a year?
So it is disproportionately benefiting those in greatest need. So the American Rescue Plan expanded the child tax credit for a year. The president is proposing an expansion until 2025. I'm advocating for a permanent expansion because I believe a permanent child tax credit would be to families with children what Social Security has been to senior citizens. It would be part of the American social safety net. And just like FDR never put an expiration date on Social Security, why should we put an expiration date on a permanent child tax credit, which is essentially Social Security for our children?
And what about, I mean, the idea of a universal basic income? Andrew Yang, who's running for mayor in New York, he made that a big issue. That was his signature issue. And people talk about it a lot more. I don't think people realize even Richard Nixon was for it way back
when Republicans were sane. So.
Yeah, and even liberals sometimes. That was pretty liberal.
This was pre-Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Right, because it was pre-Sarah Palin.
Yeah.
It was pre a lot. Yeah, it was good old days. Sanity. But the idea being that it's actually probably cheaper and more efficient than the way we do welfare now. It is welfare, of course, but instead of slicing and dicing between different people, married people and single people and old people and young people, just one basic income. Is that where you are?
Look, I think we are as close as we've ever been to securing a basic income. We have Social Security for senior citizens. We have the earned income tax credit for low-wage workers. We have the child tax credit for families with children. You know, the best way to end poverty in America, to stimulate the economy, is to put money in the pockets of people in need, because people in districts like mine are going to spend those dollars locally, which will not only create income for businesses, but for the workers employed by those businesses. So it's not only good morals, it's also good economics.
So as the first Afro-Latino, right? That's your words. Is that the right saying?
Afro-Latino, Afro-Latinx.
Okay. All right.
Intersecting identities.
I just know the words are...
I have to pay more dues in Congress because of all my identities. So.
It's very easy to get the words wrong.
It would be less expensive to be a white male in Congress, I can assure you.
Interesting. But you could be insufferably woke, and I think you're just perfectly sane and a old school liberal. That's what you know, you want police reform, as I think everyone knows there needs to be some, but you're not for defunding the police, which a lot of your party uses that phrase. Some of them even talk about abolishing the police. That's not where you are.
You know, part of the reason is I'm a college dropout. And George Orwell said there are some ideas that are so stupid only intellectuals can believe them.
Yes.
And so I'm an organizer who has my feet planted in the ground.
Right.
I represent the people of the South Bronx. And the people of the South Bronx, like most rank-and-file Democrats, are practical, not ideological, and want us to focus on the bread and butter issues of health and housing, schools and jobs. And that's where my focus lies.
And the police. You're
Look, what people want is transparent and accountable and constitutional policing.
Right.
The central challenge affecting American policing is a lack of accountability, right? Officers are rarely, if ever, held accountable for abusing their power. Part of the problem is culture, right? The blue wall of silence. But part of the problem is the doctrine of qualified immunity. It's become a license for police officers to abuse their power with impunity, which is why I support the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which would abolish the doctrine of qualified immunity.
Okay. And the other way I think you've been incredibly gutsy is on Israel.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, we're talking about the police. Somehow, the Israeli war that we just had got conflated on social media among the woke, who are people who actually fell asleep during history class. With our racial problems here in America, and I just want to say, kids, what's going on in Israel has nothing to do with George Floyd. It's not about racism. I don't think they would know this, less than half of Israelis are white. The reason why they're bombing buildings is not because they're racists, it's because there are rocket launchers in those buildings. And I think you're the only Democrat who has been forthrightly standing with the country that seems to be more aligned with our liberal values.
For me, the progressive position is the coexistence of a Jewish state and a Palestinian state, not the existence of one to the exclusion of other.
Right.
For me, there's a difference between promoting peace and inciting hatred. And most of the words and ideas and memes that I've seen amplified on Twitter are aimed at inciting hatred for Israel rather than promoting peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And my concern is that the hysterical demonization of Israel has set off a global wave of anti-Semitic violence and vitriol. And hate is never going to bring us peace. It's only going to bring more violence, and that's my basic concern.
Right.
And then to your point, there's a wonderful writer, Maddie Friedman, who warns against the danger of Americanizing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Mm-hmm.
We as Americans think we're the center of the universe, and we tend to apply an American perspective where it doesn't belong. This is not a black and white conflict. As you said, 20% of the Israeli population consists of Israeli Arabs, Israeli Palestinians, and a majority of the Israeli Jewish population consists of Mizrahi Jews from North Africa and the Middle East, Sephardic Jews who are Spanish Jews,
right.
There are Ethiopian Jews. This is not a black and white conflict. This is a brown versus brown conflict.
Only about 44% of the Israelis look like your dentist.
And so I feel like we have to be... But we have to be careful not to reduce everything to an overarching narrative. Every country, every conflict has its own history, its own particularity, its own complexity, and none of that should be ignored in favor of an overarching ideology that purports to explain everything.
What bothered me so much about it, among other things, was that it seems like the progressives, or the people who think they're progressive, have aligned themselves with a place, Gaza. The war was between Israel and Gaza, that is so against liberal values. Gaza is a theocratic state. They have no political democracy. They haven't had elections since 2006. They're never going to give up power. They run it like a mafia. It's a kind of a thugocracy. Women are treated worse than in porn.
Do you want me to make the progressive case for Hamas? Is that...
No, I don't. I'm not looking.
Okay.
No, I think we're on the same side.
No, we are. I know
on this one. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, or how progressives. They have honor killings there. How progressives could have gotten into their head, and this is not just in the recent history, but in the last 15, 20 years we've seen this, with these kind of values that are not liberal values.
Look, it's inexplicable to me. Israel is held to a double standard. I ask people,
Right.
ask yourself a simple question. If you and your neighbors were the target of 4,000 rockets, what would you expect your government to do? Would you expect your government to do nothing? Now, having said that, once hostilities break out, it is critical for a third party like the United States to immediately intervene and negotiate a ceasefire and end the bloodshed, because as you said previously, there are no winners in war, right? Everyone loses amid the wretchedness of war. But I do feel like Israel is held to a double standard, and there is an undercurrent of anti-Semitism in the disproportionate scrutiny of Israel.
Well, Congressman, I really appreciate your guts. And I hope you come back and visit us soon.
Absolutely.
As you ascend up the ladder in politics, which I know you will. All right.